Thank you so much for being here. We were a little skeptical about how many people will show up, so that the fact that people are here today, we're like, check, the event is great. So we're so glad you're here and ready to be engaged in this conversation about Affinity identity spaces at St. Stephen's before, now, and our plans for the future. My name is Yvonne Adams. I'm the Director of Equity and Inclusion at St. Stephen's, so I oversee all of the programming for students, parents, faculty, board members, help them try to see things from a variety of lenses. And I've been doing this for 10 years. I absolutely love my job. Not every day is the same, which is also a great blessing. So I feel privileged to share this role and walk on this journey with so many other great people. Just to give you an overview kind of what we're going to do today, we're going to have panelists. We have panelists. We're going to ask a few questions about affinity groups and what they mean, what we do here at St. Stephen's, how their experience was as they navigated the Hill during their times here. And then we're going to also have some breakout sessions. The breakout sessions will be divided into three different groups. The different groups are people of color, white people, and anybody that identifies as LGBTQ. So you can choose, if you identify in a couple of them, you can bounce around, you can do whatever. But in the spaces, you should be able to speak from the I perspective and not go as a voyeur to look to see what the other people are doing, and then we'll come back together as a group to share out. Before I introduce the panelists and get started with questions for them, I'm going to ask our breakout leaders to introduce themselves first so that you know them. Virginia Talley.
Hi everyone, Virginia Talley. I graduated in '97 and then I came back and was a faculty member here for 7 years. Stopped teaching here last year and decided to break off on my own and start a travel business. But while I was a faculty member here, Greg here, and I ran the Gender and Sexuality Alliance and the Affinity Space for LGBTQ students. So happy to be back on the Hill.
Caitlin.
I'm Caitlin Sweetlam. This is my 8th year teaching at St. Stephen's. I'm not an alum, but I do live on campus now, and I work in the international office, and this year I'm also one of the coordinators of equity and inclusivity at the school, so working with Yvonne and Greg, and I am one of the co-founders of the white allyship space for adults that's called AWARE. It's the Alliance of White Anti-Racist Educators. And I also am one of the faculty sponsors for the student component of that. So we have a student white allyship space that's called WOKE, White People Open to Knowing More About Equity. The faculty sponsors of that group as well. And just looking forward to having a conversation with y'all about all of this.
Good afternoon, my name is Virginia Cumberbatch. I'm a 2006 graduate of St. Stephen's, and I currently serve as the director of the Social Justice Institute and Center for Community Engagement at the University of Texas at Austin, and a few other hats. I'm really excited to be here. I've done a lot of work around sort of the importance of dismantling institutional racism in education through storytelling. So I'm really excited for the conversation to unfold, and I'll be leading the People of Color Affinity Group breakout session.
Awesome. Hi all. My name is Greg Brandy. This is my fourth year teaching in the English department. I'm the 11th grade sponsor, and with Caitlin, I'm a coordinator for equity and inclusion in the upper school. So as Virginia stated, last year, 2 years ago, we started an affinity group space called True Colors for all our LGBTQ identified students, and it's a really vibrant space. We also still have the GSA, right, started by actually Jennifer Sterling at the panel, which is also kind of standing room only. Really excited to be all here, and I'll be co-facilitating with Caitlin in the White Fragility space.
What's the GSA?
Sorry, Gender and Sexuality Alliance.
And another point of clarification, LGBTQ is lesbian, LG, gay, transgender, questioning, or queer. And what's so interesting about that and about these affinity spaces is just thinking about back to when I first started here at St. Stephen's and to where I am now, it wasn't something that we really talked about. It was almost as if you talked about a difference, you were considered problematic. So if you named someone of a specific culture, if you said, well, the black girl, oh, that's racist, like, that's kind of in the generation I was brought up in and previously, right? If you talked about race, you for sure weren't talking about sexual identity or sexual orientation out loud, right? A lot of those times we had these conversations in the back rooms at home, and you whispered about the aunt that was living with another woman, but we didn't really talk about it publicly. We didn't talk about what the difference was between a white experience and a black experience. And that's sort of the reason why identity spaces, affinity spaces were born at St. Stephen's. We kind of had pseudo-affinity spaces, so people that identified in certain different ways started gathering together and having conversations. And as we saw those conversations happening, it was like we need to get a grapple on those and give some structure to those spaces. So we initially started with affinity spaces just for African American students and international students. We had a good number of people ready to be involved in those. And from those, others have sprouted up and came about. And those spaces really are a place to empower marginalized communities on our campus. It's really, really easy to say that, you know, we were founded as the first integrated boarding school in the South and everything is great at St. Stephen's. Not everybody was having that experience. There were students of color, students from international backgrounds, LGBTQ students from a variety of places that were not having the mainstream experience and were expected to just go along to get along. And it sort of bubbled up in that way so that those spaces started talking about what it felt like in the Black affinity group, what it felt like to be reading Huck Finn and the N-word came up and students turned towards you and what that felt like. So it was things like that we started having conversations about, and it wasn't initially, well, I shouldn't say here at St. Stephen's, but initially across the nation, when affinity spaces are created, people are like, oh, this is reverse racism, this is being exclusionary, and we didn't want it to be that way. And this is not what those spaces are about. Those spaces are about a place to talk from the eye perspective about what it's like to navigate it, specifically this place, which is not the same for every single person, right? So it was a space to have that conversation and then feel empowered to be in a mainly white heteronormative space. So that was the genesis of the affinity groups, and they have grown. I think we have up to 5 or 6 in the student level, and then we have 2, hopefully starting 3 for the adults in the community. They have become very, very empowering places, places where students can go to feel safe and secure in their identity, and then feel that in turn feel safe and secure in their identity in the classroom, in the dorms, on the athletic fields, in the fine arts, so all of those spaces. I think it's been a great thing for our school. It has not been without its challenges, for sure, but that is one of the things that I love about St. Stephen's is we don't shy away from the challenge. We jump right into it and try to navigate it, and we don't always do it perfectly. So does anyone have any questions about affinity spaces or any questions before I go on to ask questions for the panelists? Yes.
I just want to say.
Can you tell me your name?
My name is Paige Allen, class of '60, and I just want to say that I am absolutely delighted to know that those things exist on this campus now, because they certainly weren't there.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much for doing that.
Absolutely. Okay, I'm gonna allow the panelists to introduce themselves, your name, graduating year, and anything you think would be pertinent to the conversation, and also what you're doing currently. as well.
Okay. Claire Fenton Simmons, a daughter of Dobby and Alan Fenton, and class of 93. I'm a college counselor, among other things. And both my children are current students. My son is a sophomore and my daughter is an 8th grader.
Are you employed here?
I am. I'm a college counselor. Sorry, I should have said that. Here at St. Stephen's. Yeah.
And a part of Aware.
Yes. Oh, yes. And I'm a faculty member involved in Aware with Caitlin.
My name is Yasmin Smith, class of 2012. I am now an attorney in the daytime, and then I also do development work for nonprofits with equity lenses. And I think what makes my situation a little bit unique, first of all, being Black, but I was also from a lower socioeconomic status. I was a first-generation graduate, and I was a boarder. So I found myself in a very specific spot where I couldn't, not even within kind of that home base, I could look towards someone and actually see myself.
My name is Jennifer Sterling. I'm class of 2013. These days I teach middle school, and I also founded and run my own theater company on the side and do a lot of theater work here in Austin. Like Greg or Virginia mentioned, I was one of the founding members of the Gender and Sexuality Alliance back in the day, I think my freshman year at St. Stephen's, which has been really amazing to see it grow under y'all's leadership since then. So yeah, thanks for having me.
And I will also say that, just as a side note, Jenny came to me, maybe her junior or senior year, I can't remember, was like, we need gender neutral bathrooms. And then just proceeded to like, all this research, and we need to do this, and this is why, and this, and I was like, okay, we're good, we'll do it. She was like, well, wait a minute, this, and I was like, no, we're not gonna argue about this. Yes, we need it. I'm gonna go to the head of school and we're gonna get it done. Oh, okay.
That was my senior year. I wanted it to be before I graduated.
That's right.
Yes, so my name is John Williams, and I'm from the class of 74, and I have been living in Mexico my whole adult life, and currently a realtor in the state of Oaxaca, and I'm gay, so I guess that's one of the reasons and so that's my story.
My name is Rudy Green, Rudolph Green, for those who were in my class. Class was 1971. I think I'm Black. I'm obviously old. I'm kind of a retired attorney and university compliance officer. I had a son who attended school here, class of 2007. I had a younger brother who attended school here 1986. And I came to St. Stephen's in 1968, which one media outlet called a year there was a crack in time. And I was the first Martin Luther King scholar here.
Hi, I'm Emily Hummel, class of 86. Currently a writer-editor with the state of Texas with the Inspector General's office. As a writer, every day I think of both Fentons who taught me where to put the commas. So,
I'm still correcting comments.
and Jane Hines, thank you. And yeah, definitely in the category of it takes all kinds, because while I appreciate gender neutral bathrooms, I call it the quirky introvert bathroom. Where you just, you be you. Talk to anyone. That was it. It was just all through the 80s. It wasn't a kinder, gentler time so much as a shallower time where I feel like we weren't talking about the issues. So I'm thrilled to be here.
So the first question I'll ask the panelists, and we'll do this for about 30 minutes, questions for the panelists, and I'll leave some time at the end if you would like to ask questions of the panelists. They haven't been prepared for those, so take it easy on them. The first question I would like to ask is to describe a time or an event where your identity as whatever It could be race, religion, gender, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, whatever was felt at St. Stephen's. Like you felt some sort of a difference in that identity space. And we can go, don't have to go in order.
Yeah, we're not starting with me.
I So there were two instances my freshman year at St. Stephen's that really, really stuck with me, and I don't know who all here was at St. Stephen's in, I guess 2009 when this would have happened, but the first thing that happened was in the Bell, the student newspaper. There was an anonymous like op-ed piece basically that was published, and it started, "I'm gay, I'm the person sitting next to you on the bus, I'm the person sitting across from you at your lunch table, I'm in your Spanish class, I'm like all of these things, and I'm never gonna come out at St. Stephen's because of these reasons." And I don't know to this day who wrote it.
I remember that piece, and I don't know who wrote it.
Yeah, it was a really, really powerful piece, and it got the whole campus talking. It was really well written. It was really powerful, but the buzz around campus was, one, who wrote it, and two, why on earth would this person not feel comfortable coming out at St. Stephen's, the most accepting, wonderful place in the universe? And I remember, like, with a few of my friends being like, I don't know if that's like actually the experience, and maybe the fact that our reaction to this piece is who wrote it rather than what are the concerns that this person's raising is the reason why. And it was kind of in part a response to that why myself, along with 3 other people, decided to kind of start the GSA, and I have to especially give credit and name to Sibel Steiner, who was one of like the real leaders of that, who's class of 2011. She's absolutely one of the most incredible people I've ever met in my life. She's a complete rock star and was my like gay mentor when I was a baby high school gay. And after the GSA had first like kind of been founded, we partnered with a statistics class at St. Stephen's and did an anonymous survey of the student body for kind of like people's thoughts and reactions to the LGBTQ community. And there was one response that also, again, this was anonymous and I don't know who wrote it, but it has stuck with me every day of my life since then. Someone who wrote, I don't think we have any gay people at St. Stephen's because this is kind of an upper class school. And when I read that, I was like, I do not even know where to start. There's so much to unpack here. But it was kind of like that was the climate and that was the environment my freshman year when we first created the GSA, and that was kind of where we were coming out into as a community. So those were 2 events that really stuck with me. And then from then to my senior year when we like had gender neutral bathrooms on campus with like a ribbon cutting ceremony in chapel, and like, it was a lot of growth.
Anybody else?
I'll say something. There was no hiding the fact that I was black. But aside from that, I came from I'd like to think of it not just in terms of race, but in terms of culture. Yes, I came from what I would say a lower socioeconomic group, but I also came from an environment which was, religious society was extremely different. I grew up in a Pentecostal church in an all-black environment. And when I came to St. Stephen's, I read in church out of a book. I stood up on the pew. I sat down on the pew. I remember Catherine Rustis was the teacher of history, but it had religious connotations. I remember writing a paper saying, St. Stephen's has killed my God. And the whole concept of how you interacted with the environment religiously was extremely different. And it was baffling in certain ways and certainly uncomfortable. For me, fortunately, I had other ways of being able to integrate in the community because I was an athlete, and team sports was another group that allowed me to feel more comfortable in the environment. But I also got to know other black students, of course, at school. I think there was a fairly significant influx of black students the year I came. We called ourselves the Dirty Dozen. There were 12 students out of about maybe just over 200 students altogether. And I can talk some more about, but I'm not going to right now, about things that were done to deal with concepts of race consciousness, because that was a big deal in the late 60s. I mean, I came from a segregated school. This was the first school I ever attended with white kids. So,
Sorry. I'm also on duty, so I hope the dorm is not on fire.
Well, I will say that I came from a public school. I was going to Crockett before I transferred here, and or applied here, and was accepted. And I will say, it certainly was a much more accepting place for people that were slightly different than everybody else. However, you certainly could not express your sexuality and be open about it, that's for sure. I remember one boy was expelled for, saying he was in love with another guy, another boy. And so that was totally unacceptable. But it was definitely a more accepting place for people that were different than the public school system, that's for sure. And thank goodness it's much better now. So that's about all I can remember about.
The one thing that I will say and put in the space is that there are oftentimes people think about St. Stephen's as a super liberal, open, and accepting place and that goes along with the political leanings. And I just want to put it in the space that we do have some conservative students here currently, as I'm sure they were here when you were a student. And we're working really, really hard to create a space for them. This is a voice that feels unheard at St. Stephen's. And so we're working really, really hard. We have a student group that has just started, so they can also have their safe space, because I think that's important. And when we say we're inclusive, what does inclusive mean? Does that mean every single person? And most students ask me that, and where I think we draw the line as a community is hate. If you can just move from hate to tolerance, you're welcome here. I remember I had a conversation with a faculty member who was doing a unit on tolerance, and I was like, tolerance? Like, that's all we doing at St. Stephen's? And she was like, Yvonne, for some people, that's as far as we can get them. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. You're right. And that we have to be okay with that. We have to be okay with that. And I talk a lot to our students that we can be in conflict and still be in community. And we have to work hard for that. We haven't done a good job as adults in these last couple of political cycles. We haven't done a good job of that. And so that's something we're talking about with our students and on a deep, deep level, and trying to have those. They're hard. They're hard conversations to be in with somebody you don't agree with, but it's how we come together, in my opinion, and not get further apart. To be able to have conversations with people of differences. My other question for the panelists is, describe a time where you experienced a different culture of some sort and you were appreciative of being at St. Stephen's.
I came here in 8th grade from Wimberley, which was just very small, very white town, kind of like Mayberry. But so to be with so many different people, it was just exciting. And one year my roommate was from Indonesia, another year roommate was from Africa, and then I had some other small town roommates in there. But to have just that exposure, where you're living together, and I think that was one of the things that makes St. Stephen's so special is the boarding school aspect, where you are all in community and just trying to get through high school together, So while we weren't maybe sharing things or having deep, rich discussions about similarities or differences, you're just there with each other, supporting each other, sharing math homework, and it's that experience that just sort of tied us all together, and it's why we're all still so in touch today, I think, so. special?
Well, I would say that it just introduced me to a culture of intellectualism that is completely unavailable at Crockett High School. That's for sure. And made my whole life, and I'm very thankful. It was the best thing that ever happened to me, was coming to St. Stephen's. And besides, I mean, in spite of the fact that you couldn't be open about your sexuality, but thank God you can be now. So that's for me.
I'd like to just add one little fact. I mean, in the early days, St. Stephen's was primarily a boarding school. So it's hard to kind of remember that this school has been through certain changes in terms of the makeup of the student body. It was when I was in school, it was about 2/3 boarding students. So the day students were kind of like the out group in one sense.
I think let's start with, I was born on campus at a time when Austin was a whole lot smaller and a whole lot less cosmopolitan, less of the blue dot that it is now in the middle of Texas. And that my earliest memories are, babysitters from all over the world. These twin boys speaking Arabic, babysitting me while my parents taught class. And I imagine how different it would have been. And, yes, to all the things that have been said about all the conversations we never had because we were too polite to have all those conversations. But those early formative experiences of an institution that looked really, really different than all the other places that I was when I moved in spaces off campus in Austin at that time. And my elementary schools that were completely white, and so that imperfect as this place can be and still is, that the idea of this community that was so different, so tiny, so isolated from the town, and so different from everything else around it, was really formative, I think, in the way I understood other people.
As a boarder, you go home. You don't go home, right? You go to your dorm that becomes your home, and your dorm parents legitimately become your parents. They step into those roles, and the people you're living with, those are, to this day, I consider my sisters. So for me, I really adamantly remember that after study hall to in bedtime, right, when you kind of have some free movement and you're kind of hungry because you're a teenager, and so you're like knocking on doors, like, what do you have? What do you have? But the people in your dorm room, your sisters, are from all across the world. So even the snacks and the food and the experiences you get to have, the food in the dorms, it was like a multinational buffet of food. So I was introduced to things that I didn't know what it was. It might have smelled differently to me, but I put it in my mouth and it was absolutely delicious. And then just kind of the colloquialisms in different languages. Like one of my best friends, she was raised on a compound in Saudi Arabia, and when she would get frustrated, her name is Denise, when she'd get frustrated, halas. And I'd be like, what is it? And she'd just be like, it's done, it's over. And to this day, if I get to a point where I'm done with something and we're done, halas. And it's really nice because people from the Middle East will look at me and some sort of, it's a connection that I can then, share with them. I'd also say just, an overlay of St. Stephen's is the culture of excellence. Being where I was from, I was adamantly told specifically I would never be able to do what I'm doing currently at this day and time, that I could not be an attorney, that I could not succeed the way that I have succeeded in life. And St. Stephen's was the first place where I was told by people that looked completely different than me, that had risen, or their parents had risen to these pinnacles of excellence, that you can, come on, we're all doing it, and there was no room, there is no failure in this society, we are all raising to this level. So I think that culture piece is something that was really different to me when I came to St. Stephen's.
You know, other people have said it, but I've talked some with my parents to kind of reflect back on like how I ended up at St. Stephen's in 6th grade. You know, I don't really like have a lot of conscious memories of what brought me here. And my parents were both products of public school education. They're big believers in public education. And they were like, the alternative was Westlake, and you would have not had nearly as diverse an experience going to Westlake High School as you would have at St. Stephen's. And even not that was the only reason I came here, but that was a big part of like the conscious decision by my parents.
One thing that I've heard mentioned so far, and something that I still struggle with when we get to the senior retreat, is I hear a lot of students say, I wish I had met you before. Oh, I wish I had gotten to know you better. So I'm making it my personal goal to make sure that no, you're just not gonna sit next to somebody from Saudi Arabia, but that you have conversation with somebody from Saudi Arabia, that we're engaged in these conversations and we're intentional about engaging in those conversations. Because oftentimes we think that proximity to something makes us makes it easier to deal with, and just being proximal, we know, is not enough. So not just being proximal, but making sure that we're intentional about the conversations happening in our classrooms, in the dorm rooms, at our lunch tables, in advisory, like all of those places. And not just walking side by side up the hill, but walking in community up the hill. So we're trying to be move from just being next to somebody, but really being intentional about that. One last question before I open it to our audience. How did you make sure your identity, as you decide on what identity you want to speak on, was safe and secure? How did you make sure your identity as whatever was safe and secure at St. Stephen's?
Didn't talk about it.
Well,
That's about all you can do.
I think I felt very lucky at St. Stephen's in that although I think I was like fairly visibly not visibly gay in terms of like appearance, but visibly gay, and everyone was like, oh, Jennifer, like the gay one. But I wasn't the first because Sybil came before me, and she had like this really brilliant, like innate sense of what being the first meant, and like how, and not that she was the first gay kid in St. Stephen's history, but she was like, you know, very openly and the first out in my memory and in my like generation at St. Stephen's. And she had a really clear sense of like what it meant to carry that burden of being the first, and to like live her life in such a way that she was sort of like beyond reproach and could advocate for change and be visible, and like how she had to potentially like make adjustments in her personal life to not like to make sure that the example she set and the torch that she carried would like pave the way for the rest of us. And I think she really imbued that in me and like taught me what that looked like and how to advocate for myself. And so when we first created the GSA, it was the 4 of us, and we met in secret, and no one knew about it at the chaplain's house on weekends. And then we had like a coming out chapel, like not of ourselves, but like as a club. And we were like, guess what? This exists. We've been meeting in secret. And we're like, if you want to meet with us, find one of us and we'll tell you the secret time. You had to be like, no, because there was this fear that someone would like come and make a list of names or something, right? And so the first year it was like, we grew a little bit, but we were still like secretly meeting on weekends. And then the next year we were like, we're actually gonna be a real club and like open it up. And then eventually we changed the name from the Gay Straight Alliance to the Gender and Sexuality Alliance. And then when I heard after I graduated that the students decided that like the GSA was becoming too overrun with people, and they like needed their own like affinity space, and they were like, yeah, because I came back and I was a dorm parent, and they were like, well, Miss Sterling, we've gone back to having secret gays only meetings. And I was like, wow, we've come full circle in the most beautiful way. There's so much support and so much like enthusiasm. And these students were like, this is great, and also we need an affinity space. And I think that's like a really cool way that it's developed over time.
It's interesting to hear you say, you didn't speak about it at all. Obviously, it had to be reflective of the time and the space you're in. and what you felt comfortable with. I took the direct opposite approach. I'm black, 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 black. Don't like if you say something incorrectly to me, you're going to hear this tone. I call it my mother's voice. You're going to hear this tone. I don't know. I'm not going to sit here and make you feel comfortable with who I am as a person, or the way that my hair looks, or how I speak, or how I interact with you. And if you do something that offends me, it's going to be a learning lesson. I had to get out of the wagging my finger at someone. I did have to learn approach and tact. And so instead of being angry, I thought, aha, how fortunate and blessed I am to be put in this part of your path, to be able to share knowledge with you. Like, what greatness and honor does my Creator bestow upon me, that He thinks that I am worthy to give you this life lesson. You gonna learn right today. So if you come around me and you say, "Oh, that's so ghetto," okay, let's digest what that means, and what are you calling ghetto, and what is the hood to you, and who are those people? If you come around me, and this was very common, the changing of someone's dialect depending on who they're around. I do it, know your persona, know your personnel, right? You don't speak to everyone. I don't speak to my mother the same way I speak to my boss. I mean, sometimes he gets out of cuff, so I have to redirect him. But that all being said, you'd be on the hill, and the seniors would congregate there, and I think sometimes they would forget I was there. There was tons of times people would just forget that I was there, and their conversation would go away. That it was very apparent they thought they were in a space where certain things were allowed and tolerable. You don't need to mock my dialect and the way that my body moves. I know it's beautiful and I know you admire it, but if you're trying to give the impression that, oh, you had to put somebody in line, but you're doing all of this and you're going into a dialect that is reflective of a culture and you're making fun of it, that's the time where I would step in and say, I don't understand what we're doing here. Is that funny to you? Am I a joke? Are you making fun of me? I don't understand what's going on, and we would trace it all the way back. Usually they'd stop and they'd heal, okay, and I really couldn't find many that would stand against me and not come the way that I was swaying them. But I was very adamant about, for me being in this space, I need to feel comfortable, and whoever comes after me, very much reflecting Sabelle, whoever comes after me needs to be very comfortable in this space, and not only for my identity, but for anybody else's identity. So if you were doing something that was putting on a mask or a charade of somebody else's identity, listen here, on today, you're gonna be taught a life lesson. We're gonna have a conversation about it.
It's interesting also that you bring that up about people almost forgetting that you were there, because I think that when we talk about affinity space, it's important to remember that the people in the non-marginalized groups have always had affinity spaces, and there have always been white dominant spaces and Christian dominant spaces and male dominant spaces, and exclusive spaces. And so that's it's the existence of affinity groups for marginalized spaces are a reaction to that, not something that is coming in that does not exist for other groups. And I think that whether people are forgetting about your identity or not aware of your identity or something, it's easy for people in marginalized groups to remember what happens in the affinity groups of the non-marginalized, to be exposed to that. So I think I'm glad you brought that up.
I had a recollection from when I was senior. I was a proctor in the dormitories. It was called Ives. So I was at St. Stephen's, kind of at the height of what was called the Black Power movement. It was part of the Civil Rights movement. So there was a lot of interest among the black students in asserting themselves in one respect. But one of the things, I think about it now, that's really kind of continued in the way I deal with my immediate environment today. Again, I was a proctor, and there was a friend of mine was the other proctor, but the way Ives was set up, it was a suite, and you could have you could both sleep in the same room and then have another room that was like a study area or a living area, or you could stay in separate rooms. We ended up staying in separate rooms, and I had a lot of, Black interest posters, information on my walls, and I had a black curtain that separated the hallway from my room. And my friend says, "You created your own black world here in St. Stephen." I said, well, in one sense, I guess I was, but I mean, I was really trying to think about my culture as being something positive and separate. But at the same time, it's within the whole of what St. Stephen's is. So now I'm an art collector, and most of the art I collect is by people of African descent. So I still surround myself with Black cultural indicators.
Yeah, I just feel like St. Stephen's then, so much of it was just really wonderful faculty that were just, you be you, whoever you are, whatever box you're trying to figure out, wherever you are.
There were exceptions to that. I mean, if you had announced that you were gay, Robert Phipps would have immediately expelled you.
Yeah.
Instantly. Okay, so
Can you speak up,
there was
please?
nothing friendly about that person. I can tell you that.
That's interesting, and I wouldn't have thought that at the time, but then I wasn't thinking about it at the time. I just was very, just felt really supported, and I mean, being away from home, just, it was really important to have so many people you felt were on your side.
Well, unless you announced that you were gay, it's a whole different matter.
I can imagine.
I'll just chime in that fortunately we've come a long way since those days, which is like, thank goodness, because I remember two teachers coming out as gay when I was a student in 96, 97. And I still remember, in chapel, in front of the whole school. And it was just, I still remember going up to one of them who was my math teacher and saying, wow, that was amazing. And I think I was totally like, I didn't realize I was gay, quote unquote, at the time, but I think I probably knew it, had just totally repressed it. I remember saying to him, I could never do something like that. Mm-hmm. And to come back as a faculty member, fully aware of being gay at that point, and Yvonne saying, do you want to come out to the school? And I said, oh, hell no. That's terrifying. I mean, because I started in the middle school and I was very scared to be out to students and to parents, especially in the middle school, because people have this weird thing about gay people teaching younger kids. I don't know. And so I was like terrified, but I still remember thinking the next year, I have to do this. Like, this is really important. There have gone, waves of out faculty members over the years. And, I think Greg and I have a constant joke that we were like the token gay faculty members. And, it's like you don't really want to put your whole personal life out there, but I feel like it was really important, for those teachers ahead of, when I was a student here and then later on. I just think it's very helpful to have mirrors. You're talking about mirrors a lot, and because it still is a pretty scary place for LGBT students. I mean, it's much better, but like having worked with the Affinity group, it's not all peachy keen all the time. So like you were mentioning, just lingo and things people will say, the whole "that's so gay" thing. People don't even think about it, and you have to go.
Sibel was the person that gave me my life lesson. We were stretching before basketball practice. And I said, oh, that's okay. And she looked at me, she goes, in front of her, she's like, yes, I'm gay. And you just said that's okay and gay could have been interchanged with something negative. Do you think I'm negative, yes? And it broke my heart. Never said it ever again. And I was just like, life lesson learned today. But that perspective is so different from mine because there's no, there's no hiding black. No hiding you're different. And I think that, as I alluded to, of people changing their dialect, obviously I think that's them trying to reach out, trying to show camaraderie in some misguided way. But to link it back to faculty members, those faculty members that were around me, Coach Adams, she is still Mama Adams in my phone. Like that is like when I say my dorm parent became my mother, my dorm parent became my mother. So I definitely did have faculty members that were very adamant about making me feel comfortable and also learning how I learn within my culture. Like Miss Respis, I tell this story all the time. Miss Respis was one of my dorm parents. She was my advisor, and she was my history professor. So there was no getting around Miss Respis when it came to there was no, me and Miss Respis were right here. And I remember the first year, you know, I had come from Fulmore Middle School, magnet program, straight A's, just the best student ever. I got to St. Stephen's, I almost failed out. Like it was a very hard learning curve. And I remember Ms. Respis saying, you know, you're gonna come to tutoring. You're gonna come to tutoring with me. And I said, I didn't want to, you know, I thought tutoring was like dumb kids and, you know, that mental space. And she's like, it's not a question, like, it's not a suggestion. Like, you're gonna come to tutoring with me. And so I show up at this tutoring session in the Crossroads, right? It's like a Saturday morning, and I'm like all upset. I'm 13, 14, so I'm too cool for school anyway. And I get there, and I'm like all upset. And no joke, like this person that had a completely different life than me, that looked completely different than me, like she said, okay, so I know you're having trouble with the dates, and so I think I have something for you. And I was like, what do you have for me, Miss Respis? And no joke, she gets out a pencil, and this old white lady starts beating on the desk. In 1942, and like raps me. Raps me in my date. And at the time, I was like, okay. Like, your flow could use some work, Miss Respis. But I started excelling in that class, and now that I've had some time to think back on it, that was someone that saw that I was kind of on this island by myself and was having difficulties, and sat and took the time and effort that she thought was needed to not only like connect with me as a person, but make me a better student. So like, I understand we as humans have had some bad periods of history, but I do think that when I was here, I could lean primarily on my faculty members to make sure that I felt like I was home, even though I was not at home.
I don't know if facilitators are supposed to be talking, but I have a question I think was prompted by an exchange earlier, and it was interesting to see sort of, you know, different times, obviously, but our different perspectives and sort of this retrospective that we have of our time here. And I think so I'm 15 years out. That was hard to say. 15 years out, or no, 12 years out. And I think one of the things that's really interesting, because I'm very close with a big sort of cohort of my St. Stephen's friends, and we used to joke over the UN. We had in this group was a Chinese American, an Indian American, me, a Jewish woman, you know, and there's been a really interesting sort of experience to have, because I think St. Stephen's very much functions as a microcosm of Austin, right? Which is this very perceived liberal bastion, right? And so, and I think in some ways that has protected us from really interrogating problematic policies and practices here at St. Stephen's and in Austin. And so what I've noticed in now, you know, 15 plus year friendship with friends is that, oh, you didn't experience those microaggressions like I did, and you don't see the world like I do, even though I thought we were being groomed in a very similar perspective, right? And so in today's conversations, right, around sort of equity and political conversations, you know, there's a little bit of the like, I want to protect this relationship, but there's some problematic understandings. And now even weirder, like sitting on boards with my friends' parents and realizing like, oh, yeah, you know, I went to middle school, you know, I slept over at your house over and over again, but what you said was extremely offensive, right? And so I'm wondering, now that you are however many years out, how your experience at St. Stephen's and then the maturation that you've had may have affected those relationships today.
That's interesting. I mean, you know, also the other thing that I think of is in the 80s, it was a pre-internet world. So while you're aware of you were less aware, I was less aware. You know, I wasn't one of the kids standing in line to read the newspaper in the library because I had a subscription to TV Guide. So, just nice bottle. So, yeah, but talking with friends since then, you know, there was a gal, our class was Muslim, and I didn't know it until somebody told me years later. So we just kind of weren't talking about things, but when you think about it now, you go, oh, that must have been a challenge for her. So it's very much years later, kind of wondering about different people's experiences and things, and just saying, yeah, I don't think it came up then, but it would have been an interesting conversation I wish we had had.
I was a day student, so I have no idea what it was like to be here as a boarding student and be gay. I can't imagine 1971. Well, that's not true. Actually, I knew somebody who was definitely gay. He was a boarding student. But I had a whole other life, social life outside of St. Stephen's, so it really, that was probably much easier for me than if I had been a boarding student.
Well, I think that one way in which things have changed a lot over time is you spoke to some like kind of standout exceptions in the faculty to this culture of like support and tolerance that you felt. And I think for most of my time here, I had this awareness. I was like, I think that most St. Stephen's teachers would probably be pretty cool about it. But I had very few exceptions, and I didn't think there were any St. Stephen's teachers that would be like actively hostile or negative or hateful. But I didn't really have very many examples of teachers who I knew would be like outwardly supportive and were making activist like movements in their classrooms or speaking out or were openly gay themselves while I was here. And kind of like you point out, it's like not that I had a shortage of white teachers at St. Stephen's, but when it came to the parts of my identity that could stay hidden, I just didn't know. And so I think that that's something that shifted a lot over time, where now there's like St. Stephen's teachers like having, you know, coming out chapels and stuff, which is like a huge difference. And I think I did have some teachers who were really prominent allies, including our like faculty sponsors at the GSA while I was here. Which was really powerful, but it like was over time, it was like kind of feeling things out in a way, and I think that caution is something that not everyone experienced. So I think that's also been like a shift over time.
And for me, there was no separate life, because this was just my entire life for 4 years. And so for me specifically, there was no, we can't tiptoe around each other. Like, if you said something like, it's going to be yelling matches. I mean, we're 13-year-old girls. Like, there's going to be, you know, yelling matches. There's going to be a confrontation. Especially if you're dealing with me, who's going to give you a life let go. There was going to be some confrontation, but as I've grown older, those friends that I still consider sisters, you know, to this day, we've had so many evolutions. Like, we've completely turned into different people multiple times throughout this period. But because our bond is so strong, I can still to this day say, okay, like, that's a little offensive. Like, where are we going there? Like, maybe use this language instead. So I've seen it I haven't seen it really play out, you know, me maturing, having the foresight or, you know, having the St. Stephen's experience impact my relationships with people from St. Stephen's. I've really seen it impact my relationship with people I've met after St. Stephen's. The fact that I had to have these conversations in this world and could not hide from anything means that now that I'm, you know, I went to UT Law, right? Best law school, 1,000 miles around. And there was a very specific mindset, and it was a very specific people, and I was flat out told, you know, directly, indirectly, passive aggressively, all of the different ways, from faculty members to administration to students, you do not belong here, you're not supposed to be here. And so when I got into that space, the imposter syndrome, or me not feeling like I had earned my spot, already been through that. That's all we got. This is all we got. Like, really? so I was able to, in a way, masterfully go through these different positions of life as I, climbed my career ladder in a way that I don't think would have been possible if it had not been for the hard situations I had to face as a boarding student here.
One quote, yes ma'am.
I would like to make a comment about St. Stephen's as a rule, as a whole. Last night I went to the Pioneer Spartan dinner. It was not like a normal, or what you would think of in the movies as like a classroom, class reunion. Every single person in that room was being a loving person. We're not gossiping about people. We're not doing any kinds of backbiting, nothing. The overall feeling of everything in this school that has been built over the years has to do with the word love. And you all, as a whole new group of people coming up in a whole new global community, have been blessed by the fact that you are getting your global instruction, if you will, by being blessed to be with people of different colors and different nations right here before you begin to get out in that big global world that is going to need your love, your understanding, and your attention. And I am absolutely blown away by how this school has evolved in that direction. It was going there, but I was only here when the school was 10 years old. I have seen this time after time, every time I come. And it's due to the faculty, it's due to the circumstances, it's due to the fact that you are living together as human beings. And like you said, you're having to navigate. But look what it has taught you, and you just said it. I'm using this out in the big wide world. That is incredibly important because we all have a big, huge job to do now to take care of this world of ours. Thank you all for what you're doing. And I mean that from my heart.
And we've talked a lot about the marginalized groups, and that's why I also think it's important that we have a white space that's talking specifically about anti-racist movements. Not just being okay with somebody next to you, but how are you going against the system as it's set up now. I heard somebody say, and I need to find the author of this quote, but what they said to me is, if you have black friends and you have not talked about institutional racism with them, you don't have black friends. You just know some black people. And that is what we're trying to change here at St. Stephen's. That we are definitely having the conversations that take it to the next level.
Well, and I think both to that and to Virginia's question about reevaluating, and I think as the majority, right, of my institution when I was a student here, and how appreciative I was of it and unquestioning of its glory, and talking with alums years later, and these wonderful women in my class who came out as adults, and I was like, wow, not only did I never suspect that, it never occurred to me to think about it, right? Because I didn't need to, and I was a nice kid, and I would have been fine, but it never occurred to me once. Not one time did it ever occur to me to have that conversation sort of with Emily, and, oh, well, she was Muslim. Oh, well, it's the, to be in the majority and not have to think about it, and that's so my work in Aware with the other adults on campus is about that, right? It's not about guilt, and it's not about self-shame. It's about all the questions we never thought about. We just never had to, right? And so being able to be allies for our students starts with being like, oh, right, those weren't questions we were asking. So, yeah.
And I maybe pose this to you all for us to come back and discuss after we do breakout groups, but like paying homage and like making things right. It's something I want to, like, I at a certain point, I'm done asking questions, like, it's 2019, like, I'm ready, like, okay, I'll sit and explain the definitions, and we can keep going through this, but especially when I hear your experience, John, of, like, I can still, I see myself in you a little bit when you talk of your experience, because when I drove off this campus, for the last time when I graduated, don't talk to me, don't call me, I gave you the wrong information on purpose. Don't want anything to do with y'all. But it took a lot of healing to be able to say, okay, now that I see these changes happening, I feel like I can come back and actually support this community. So what does that look like from your perspective of how do we, as a family, because we are a family, how do we support you in coming back and feeling comfortable here? How do I right those wrongs that I didn't have anything to do with, but because you feel a negative way about this situation, about this family, I want to try to help and make it right. So I would definitely want everyone in their specific perspectives to kind of think about that, because I personally would like to know like, what we as St. Stephen's can do to make sure that we right those wrongs.
And I think also, what does progress and healing look like? Like, how are we going to measure that, and how will we know?
KPIs, key performance indicators.
Yes. Yeah. Like how will we know when that's happened? Like I remember Sibel always used to say, like I feel like St. Stephen's will have come a long way on LGBTQ issues when we have an openly gay male proctor in the dorms, and that was like a thing for her, that she was like, that will be like an indicator of like progress. And I think we maybe hit that. I don't know off the top of my head, but
I don't think we're there
I don't
yet.
know. All right, well,
Something that's
so we have a goal.
Still shooting. Virginia, you were gonna say
I was just going to sort of put this in the atmosphere for our breakout sessions, that, you know, I think what often comes up in these conversations, right, is the defensiveness that this is interpersonal, and I think what's really important is to focus on the institutional, and that we're either all contributing or we're complicit, right? And so when we think about, you know, what Yasmin just identified as this opportunity for like, how can we be a part of the ongoing healing and sort of reconciliation of St. Stephen's so that everyone has an experience that is, you know, equitable? Because while I really appreciate the comments around like, this is a beautiful place where, see, Yasmin, you grew and you wouldn't have been able to face UT law without it. But at what cost, right? So like, it's not, the onus is not on a 13 or 14-year-old to have to navigate the complexities of why she's been marginalized, why she can't speak up in class, why her history teacher asked her to talk to the class about slavery, right? And so while yes, I think we are better, all of us are better people having been in this space, right? We still have to think about institutionally, who walks away having to have carried the burden, right, of teaching their peers. Right, rather than being able to navigate this space that usually happens for predominantly straight white males, which is without having to question, without having those confrontations. And so I would just sort of put that in the atmosphere for us to think about, which is, you know, at what cost for some individuals, and then what's the role we can play as alumni in making that not the story moving forward.
Yeah, when I hear other people's perspectives, it made me stronger, but that is the life of a Black woman, is things hitting you over and over and over, and that's why I have the endurance I do. But when I hear other people's experience, it sounds really, really nice. It sounds really, really nice that you were just happy. It must have been really nice to wake up and just walk out of your room and feel comfortable.
I haven't always known.
We're gonna take a 1-minute break. The breakout rooms are gonna be down this hallway, and then we're gonna convene back here. Let's try to be back here at 4:50. 4:50 in this space, okay?
Are they labeled here?
Yes, they're labeled and down this way.